All right, first things first. Everyone have a review list? The plan is to have the test on Tuesday, but we could probably have it tomorrow. No. We could have a test on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. I've done a 5-day test in weeks, and so the test will be next week. But I gave you the list. I am going to assign the rest of chapter 21. So that's 833 to 893. I'm making up numbers in my head. It's 956 to 983. But it was going to be due on Friday, but I'll make it due on Monday because what is due on Friday? Food. The jungle. And you've been skipping, so you need the jungle?
Yeah.
I thought I gave this.
No, you did. I think you did.
Okay, just if not, come on. And so that we do on Friday. That's what we do food. And wait, so that's the good or news. The good.
Yeah, that's good.
All right. So now we do have just a little bit of good news, and I'm forgetting it.
Is the world ending?
No, something else. Can't remember what I was going to tell you. Yeah, it wasn't that good. I'll remember it later. All right. So we do have to finish the Spanish-American War, the Philippine insurrection, basic diplomacy. We have to talk about wild boars.
Yeah.
Wild rice. Where does most of the wild rice come from? Minnesota. Did I show you this? Did we talk about Teddy Roosevelt at San Juan Hill?
Yes.
And who got the credit for? I mean, who didn't get credit? Yeah, 2 black regiments who took it, but Roosevelt got all the credit. He had the reporters. What was the letter from the U.S., the Spanish ambassador to the U.S. who called Roosevelt? And what did Roosevelt compare McKinley to?
Eclair.
Chocolate eclair. And what battleship exploded in Manila Harbor? And here's Thomas Edison's, yes.
Wait, it wasn't Manila Bay.
Did I say Manila Bay?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Havana. Who? Manila, the Battle of Manila Bay. Who was the victor of the Battle of Manila Bay? Dewey. And the United States attacked them first. So let's get to this. Manila Bay. All right. Thomas Edison would film a dramatic recreation of El Caney Ridge, which is one of the hills right next to Kemmel and San Juan Hill. And I want to show you how amazing already by 1899 the footage would be done. This was filmed in New Jersey. So it's going to transport you to the jungles of Cuba.
So
It's going to be one dude carrying a tree.
So wait, what did he do?
Well, Edison made, he had a film studio and made a recreation of this battle. El Caney's one of the hills right next to San Juan Hill. And I want to show you this because it's going to blow you away. You think this is New Jersey? No. Watch this. Maybe. Look at that. Do you feel like you're in Cuba? And look at the charge. And fire. It's almost 3D. They're almost like charging right at you. Then I love the one guy in a horse who disappears. Okay, in 1899, that was pretty cool. But this is really.
From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
All this footage, including this one from 1899. That's 1899. Fisticuffmanship. All right, so John Hay, the Secretary of State, would call this a splendid little war. It was over fast public opinion. It's all for the war. Yes. Oh, Santiago. Did I? Oh, I didn't quite finish that little bit. Did I talk about San Juan Hill? Did I show you this picture?
No.
Oh, shoot, I thought I did. Let me jump the gun. Oh, Santiago, right here. That's where the naval base was. So they landed near Santiago. Did I tell you about the horses?
They don't have.
Oh, there's one more story I have to tell you. They landed here and marched overland. I really thought I told you all this.
No.
There were a bunch of hills, including Alcami, Kettle, and San Juan. San Juan was the most heavily defended. So they marched overland to take them. Now, the Spanish actually were well armed, but their morale was low. And fortunately, they were not defending the beaches because they didn't bring enough whale boats, which are the big rowboats to get the troops ashore. They packed the ships really haphazardly, and they lost a bunch of gear. They put all the ammunition on the bottom because it was the heaviest for ballast. The problem is if you load something first, when do you unload it? And that's what you need first, ammo. And not only that, they didn't have enough whale boats to get the horses and mules they did have to pull the artillery and supplies. So what did they do?
Heavy man.
Push them off the boat and let them swim to shore. And they hoped that most of the horses they just bought, but a few of them had been army horses for a while. So they had men with bugles blowing the bugles, hoping the horses would swim to the bugles and the other horses would follow. About a third decided to go to Venezuela. That's down here.
Did they make it?
They didn't make it. Some are still going. Yeah. So all kinds of problems. But fortunately, with Spanish problems, San Juan Hill was the most heavily defended hill, and it was taken by black regiments. But Teddy Roosevelt took all the credit. This contemporary watercolor shows black soldiers and doing it Civil War style, putting their gear in the blanket and wrapping around the backpacks, which is horrible. But they never got the credit. The Rough Riders walked up, but no, they took Kettle Hill nearby, and then Teddy Roosevelt kind of joined this charge, but took all the credit because he had all the reporters with him. And when these hills fell, the U.S. Army put guns on the hill. The Spanish fleet could not stay. They tried to escape. Didn't work, and the war was over. The war lasted just a few months. Happened shockingly fast. Of course, I showed you that video now, so this kind of seems a little anticlimactic. And this was a postcard where they took a picture of the Citadel on San Juan Hill and painted the grass to make it look more realistic. Because it was a black and white picture. So I think that's kind of funny how they did that. So with that, you're going to hear about Teddy Roosevelt up San Juan Hill, but it's actually Kettle. So let's jump to Secretary of State called this a splendid little war. The war technically ended in 1898. But in reality, it's kind of 1902, which we'll get to in just a second. You don't need to know the number of deaths. What I want you to know is this. Significantly more soldiers died of disease and food poisoning than died of wounds in battle. Now, the disease was always a big killer. What was the big killer in Cuba?
Yellow fever.
Yeah, yellow fever. Yeah.
What did we need to know?
More men died of disease and food poisoning in the war. Now, you can imagine food, keeping fresh foods can be very difficult, and that's why the new canning industry with the modern industrial capabilities in America seemed perfect for war. You have canned foods, it's preserved, it's waterproof, it won't rot. You open it up and it's supposedly been cooked, and the idea is it's cooked before you put it in the can and then sealed so it doesn't spoil. Perfect for the Army. A lot better than trying to bring fresh food or driving a bunch of cattle or sheep with you to slaughter every night for dinner. So, you see the problem though. Where's the mouse? That is a can of corn. I just put that one in there so you can see the soldering with lead. So that's just one issue. But what happened was this. The Army put out a call, the War Department, to buy all this food. And you can imagine what the food processors and slaughterhouses were like, yes, we got this order. Let's just put anything we can in a can and sell it to the Army. So, for example, they went into the basements of these slaughterhouses and food processors where they just had the food. Stuff stacked they couldn't sell because prices were low during the panic. So this is 3-4-year-old food, not refrigerated, just sitting down there. They called it petrified meat.
Ew.
And they took that up, throw it in the hopper, which grinds it up, throw some gravy on it, maybe some borax or chalk or something to change the color and mask the smell, put it in a can, and send it on its way. I know if you're thinking, just after lunch, you're already hungry again. Well, I got a picture to show you. So here, man, made a big deal about cooking hot food, but the thing is, a lot of people died or got incredibly ill, which made them more susceptible to disease because of the bad food. Now, they've been selling this food before, but think about a mass number of people eating this processed food for their only meal, their only food. And this is going to help trigger kind of the beginnings of the idea of progressive reforms of capitalism, which will have one of its first culminations with the jungle and what's going to happen with that. So that's why I'm giving the jungle. That's only 8 years afterwards. So a Montana National Guardsman put his spoon into a can he just opened of bully beef. Bully beef is kind of a beef stew, so kind of tough beef, kind of ground up, and then with a gravy, stew. Stuck it in, click. Dug it out. Guesses?
Ring.
What?
Hoof. A ring.
A hoof?
Yeah.
You're close. Horseshoe nail.
Oh.
So obviously the hoof is ground up, but the nail still got in there. So what are they serving for bully beef?
Horse.
Whatever cheap meat they could find. And if it's horseshoe nails, that means what they were doing is whatever on the floor of the slaughterhouse, they just had a scoop.
Oh.
Gravy. I'll tell you about hot dogs. Okay, with that, I don't know why I just told just you.
Just Chloe.
So, but it's processed food. You don't know what's in it. And as a way to cut corners. As a way to cut corners, you serve that because they were buying everything as quickly as possible. And so we're going to get eventually to the Progressive Movement of Pure Food and Drug Act. And I want to show you a delicious thing now you can make with delicious processed food because you know it's safe. Where's the mouse? You ready?
Yeah.
Spam cake and spam wrapped around bananas. And that might be, I know. It's already grumbling again. Yum, yum. All right. So
Oh man, that's just
don't shake your head at me. Spam. Spam. Okay. The treaty of Paris in 1898. And yes, maybe we might do special topics. We did awful food for a unit one time. That was actually really fun. So the Treaty of Paris of 1898. And where else is it going to be, right? And the treaty, Spain had no choice but to sign it. Cuba, though, because of the Teller Amendment, independent when the United States decides it's ready. And the U.S. got Puerto Rico and Guam, still American colonies, and they paid $20 million for the Philippines. A little like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Remember that one after ending the Mexican War where the U.S. paid for California and New Mexico so we could act like it wasn't a war of conquest? So we're implying we didn't fight this war for conquest. We just happened to fight to save Cuba, and then we bought the Philippines separately. But of course not. And $20 million was, well, shockingly low. And it got signed, but this is the thing. The Senate has to ratify it. And how many votes is required? What percentage of the Senate for what? Yeah, 2/3. That's hard to get. This ratification battle will last months. And while that's happening, you have this kind of uneasy peace in the Philippines and Cuba waiting for this. And so the treaty's ratified. And here is July 4th. And now look at the cartoon. This is 1898. Remember the ones I showed you with Cuba as a damsel in distress? Now look how they draw Cuba. Look at that face. And look at this. Hawaii, Philippines. Now we're justifying taking. So we're going back to the racist kind of savage look. You know, words, this kind of stuff, it has influence. I mean, you see this stuff all the time. Eventually, either it becomes, oh yeah, that's the way it's supposed to be, or it just kind of beats you into submission. Yeah.
You talk about how they were political cartoons that would portray them like this and then portray them as like people who need help, like they're sympathetic.
Yeah.
People notice the change in drawings, right?
Maybe.
Well, what happened to people who did? Like, and they made a.
Well, there's going to be anti-imperialists.
Okay,
A lot of anti-imperialists. But remember, all you need to do when you have when you're trying to influence people with these editorials, you need to influence everybody. Just certain people, just enough. People on the margin. That's all you need. So this will never influence somebody who's totally opposed to imperialism, or even someone who's not a racist. But people in the middle may not be paying attention, or that kind of thing. That's what you're trying to get. Hey, elections are decided by about 5% of the population. 5 to 10. Those people on the margins. Which is actually kind of disturbing in a way, isn't it? But here's another one. This is even worse. If you can't, let me get the lights. So it's McKinley is kind of like a schoolmaster in these hot, sweaty climate. And look at this, the unruly kids. Puerto Rico, Philippines, Hawaii, and look how they draw Cuba now. That's 1898. That's just months after those other cartoons. And see what it says on the box? Have you used it? Implying, you know, these savages, heathens. Remember yesterday I showed you those pear soap ads and the same kind of thing. It's pretty amazing how this happens. So with that, oh, here's one more. I just thought, I just can't get over these cartoons. But I think it's important to understand the way attitudes change, and a lot of people forget what happened to the country. A lot of people do remember too. So here's Uncle Sam as a schoolmaster and teaching them how to be good government. Here's Texas and California, New Mexico, all good students. But look at Cuba. They had a lot of different ways to spell Puerto Rico, all the way to the Philippines, Hawaii. I mean, look how horribly racist this cartoon is. If you see China, look at American Indian. You notice it? I mean, that's just unreal. Remember, this is right after the Dawes Act, and then you see that? Cleaning the window. It's 4. And it's implying that America is only the big, unruly kid. It said here, the U.S. must govern its new territories with or without their consent until they can govern themselves. It says above this, England was governor colonies whether they consented or not. This is implying that the U.S. is doing it for humanitarian purposes. There was some humanitarian. I mean, it's complex, but it is complex. And there was a growing anti-imperialist league. The problem they had is we won the war so quick. It's kind of hard to, it's like, yay, we won. And some of the leaders were, do you remember who Sam Gompers was, besides having a great name? He was the head of the American Federation of Labor. You probably know Mark Twain, who wrote some of my favorite books. You ever read Life on the Mississippi? It's awesome. It's so good. Prince and the Pauper. And of course, Huckleberry Finn. That's a tough answer. I really like Huckleberry Finn. Tom Sawyer on those. Oh yeah. Even though he was trying to. Andrew Carnegie was just sold Carnegie Steel to U.S. Steel, J.P. Morgan's company, and he was an avid anti-imperialist. He actually tried to buy the Philippines for $10 million, then allow him to become independent. Okay, he's a complex man too, but just imagine having $10 million. I mean, $10 million today, I know for us is just walking around money, but back then that was a lot of money. Right, you just have $10 million burning a hole in your pocket. Yes. And then William Jennings Bryan, remember the Democratic nominee, and they opposed the annexation treaty. But here's the big deal about this. These are the 4 reasons why. And some sound very altruistic, but some really aren't. First off, the U.S. is for self-determination. This is what they say. America should be for. We shouldn't tell people how to govern themselves. Self-determination is letting people govern themselves. Do you remember the social contract? What document was that in? The social contract, Declaration of Independence. We should follow those. Because remember, we fought against a colonial power. But also, some anti-imperialists were just racist. Do we want more people who aren't white in the United States? So you notice they kind of have different things going on here. Also, some were fearing corporate power would go up and they get good commercial deals with these new colonies. Or, once you become an empire, you must not only fight to defend your empire, what other war might you get into? Civil War. They might want to be independent. Once you get a fight for empire, you're going to be in constant war. Pretty prophetic. And so, yeah.
So the anti-imperialists were racist, or they?
Some were racist.
Okay.
Some fear, and the problem is, for them, they kind of have different reasons.
Okay.
So they weren't fully unified. Where the people who wanted it could just say, we're going to get the treaty. This should remind you of, remember the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists for the Constitution? The Federalists just want the Constitution. The Anti-Federalists were all over the place. So what's going to happen? Well, William Jennings Bryan made a calculated political decision. He dropped his opposition, and it was ratified. Bryan thought, and this is the cartoon mocking William Jennings Bryan. Bryan thought, if I go against, or if I drop the treaty, it's going to pass anyway. I drop my opposition, let it happen. In 1900, I'll run for president against imperialism. But by dropping his opposition, what does he look like? Not only an imperialist, but what else?
A traitor.
And a coward too, doesn't he? Like a hypocrite, a traitor. He doesn't look like a traitor to that goal. He never recovered from this politically, ever. And this is the Senate vote. Democrats and Republicans voted for it. Some didn't vote to act like, you know, it didn't be. Never heard of it, not going to make the vote. Didn't want to make a decision. You see that a lot. Members of Congress, if they don't want to be put on one side or the other on a vote, so they might just call in sick. So, one more big deal. What kind of government are these places going to have? This went all the way to the Supreme Court in a series of cases that we lumped together the insular cases. Insular, by the way, means island, so like Guam, Puerto Rico, the Philippines. And here's the big issue. Does the Constitution follow the flag? Flag. So when we put our flag on the Philippines, do they have constitutional rights? Do they have equal rights? Are they allowed to pick their own leaders, aka what we're starting to call in the 20th century democracy? That's a big decision. When the United States conquered this area here, they said that the Constitution followed the flag. Does it now? And think about the Philippines. If they could vote, the first thing they would do is vote for what? Yeah, independence. You can't have democracy in a colony. Won't work. Here's the Philippines going to Congress. That's what that cartoon's about. Another horrible one. What do you suppose the Supreme Court ruled? Nope, they don't have rights. It's a big deal. This should remind you of something we've done in the past. Do you remember the Boston Tea Party? Do you remember the laws that Britain passed to punish the colonies for that? It's after the Stamp Act, but it's kind of the same trend. You remember? That's after, I know all these laws start blending together. That's a little before. Someone might have said about in the midst of the courtesy, but the Intolerable Acts. I know we start getting a lot of stuff blending together. But do you remember one of the laws that said Britain or British officials, if they commit a crime in the colonies, where would they be tried? Britain. Meaning different laws for different people, just like this. So we're doing the same thing that every imperial power did, almost immediately. This will become a big deal down the road. These haven't been overturned completely. It really is a gray area about constitutional rights. This is an issue right now. But before we get to that, what to do with Cuba? An amendment to the appropriations bill about independent Cuba, what to do about Cuba, would be passed in 1903. So you had this in the book called the Platt Amendment. And it's implying that here's Uncle Sam ready for Cuba to make its own independence. What is an independent? First off, Cuba can't make any agreements with foreign governments. When I put that up there, what kind of agreements do we care about?
Business.
Yeah, commercial agreements. We want to make sure that only the United States and US companies control their trade. By the way, what type of imperialism is this? This is economic. Next, if Cuba does something we do not approve of, we intervene. And when I mean intervene, what does that mean? Meaning the Marines. The Marines are relatively small. They would get much bigger in this era of intervention in Latin America. Kind of perfectly suited for island fighting, like the Pacific. Next, to make sure that we control Cuba on their eastern edge, we're going to have a permanent naval base, a massive base around a really nice harbor, a bay called Guantanamo. So Guantanamo Bay will be an American naval base, still is a US Navy base on Cuba, on the eastern edge. So the Cuban government knows, always knows, you do something against American business interests or interests of American banks, for example, and we're coming. Yeah.
It was a price left in the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Yeah, we kept the base all during that time, and it's still there now.
Yeah.
And it's a naval base, just a little section. I'll get to that in a sec. And we want to make sure that Cuba does not spend money on things like public spending on things like schools or infrastructure, or for that matter, run up a debt, because we want to make sure they can pay back their debts to American banks. So we're going to control their spending, and if they do spend more than what we want or do not pay back their debts, what do we do? Anybody want to guess the first time the Marines were sent in?
1999.
Well, this is 1903, so
1903.
you're close, but actually wait a few years, 1906. And this is going to happen time after time after time. There's going to be a lot of resentment in Cuba against the United States. And if you look at this, what type of government does the United States want in Cuba? They want democracy. What do they want? A dictatorship. And that's what the United States will support. Dictators. They want a dictatorship. That's why when Fidel Castro would overthrow a horrific dictator named Batista in 1959, Castro will become such a great hero. Castro was a pretty horrific totalitarian state in a lot of ways, but he stood up to America and the Platt Amendment. Because you can guess the United States did not ask Cuba. They told them. Here's a Cuban anti-imperialist Cuban cartoon that showed Cuba being branded. I know the S don't match up. Don't look at it too closely. Oh,
Yes.
one more thing. So in 2001, the United States was attacked September 11th. What terrorist group attacked the United States? Al-Qaeda attacked just a couple thousand people. And for complex reasons, they were in Afghanistan. Afghanistan was in the middle of the Civil War. And the U.S. did invade. We picked a side. Got one. And there's a lot of problems with that down the road. But now the United States helped, and then we basically just paid money to Afghanis. We will give you money if you bring in members of Al-Qaeda or people who help them. We'll give you money. And to Americans especially, what does a member of Al-Qaeda look like? Anyone else there? And so people just started turning people in and taking the money. What do we do with it? Well, Guantanamo Bay is a naval base.
No, it's not.
No, it isn't. Not then. It was a Navy base. But it's not in the borders of the United States. And because of the insular cases, It's a gray area if whether or not prisoners there have rights. And so, literally, they just stuck up a chain link fence in a field, because the base is a huge area, and they just put tents up and started sending these people there. Now, eventually it's become a big prison, but that's why Guantanamo Bay, because it's a gray area about constitutional rights, so they don't necessarily have to have a right to trial or any other expectation. Yeah.
So the government wanted to have a dictator? The US government wanted a dictator?
It didn't start out that way, but every time there was a democracy, they would vote to start keeping more of the money there. We're going to support a lot of dictators, which did get to the 50s. Yeah.
So who was worse, Castro or the guy before him?
Oh, the guy before. The Castro was really problematic. So, and some things were good. Castro kicked out the mob, and that's what the mob did. Yeah.
So technically then under that whole thing of people just turned in their own people for money, there's innocence involved?
About 95% raise.
Word?
We've let some out, but there's still some there. And President Obama wanted to shut it down, but for various reasons he did not push it. Republicans and some Democrats didn't want that to happen. President Trump last night said he's going to expand it. Yeah.
So, they weren't protected from like no cruel and unusual
Yeah.
punishment. So could
Or habeas corpus, so they can be held without a trial.
did we torture them to get stuff out of them?
That's coming.
Was there like controversy over that?
Yeah.
Like people argue that they should have constitutional rights. People argue that.
And so the Supreme Court ruled they do have some constitutional rights, but it's still a gray area. So they don't have all. I mean, it's really complex.
It's really weird.
But as long as they're there, you can, because it's a gray area, they can, have this kind of keep some people there. If they moved them to, let's say, Leavenworth, which is a federal prison in Kansas, then they have constitutional rights.
Or in Colorado?
So we're going to jump right to this cartoon. Here is Cuba, and this is supposed to show, this is positive to what America is doing in Cuba. Record cane crop, public schools, but once again, look how they draw Cubans. Those racist caricatures are pretty shocking, aren't they? I'm really trying to emphasize this because a lot of times people forget not only how racist it was, but also the people who are the victims of this racism, because the odds are they don't forget. And so when examples of something like this kind of comes back today, people are like, why are they mad? No, wait a second. There's a history here. So it's important to understand this history, put it in context. I'm a firm believer in context. You're supposed to say, thank you. No, actually, I'm a big believer in that. Sometimes I can do far on that. Yeah. Yeah.
The logo.
Chief Wahoo, yeah. So, the peace treaty is ratified. Woo! Peace treaty ratified. Peace. Is there something a little out of place in that? With the peace treaty being ratified? Yeah. Sports. It's not. And sports. New Orleans racing people. New Orleans racing people? Okay, with that, as soon as the Spanish were defeated at Manila Bay, the Filipinos declared independence. As this newspaper headline says, they declared independence. But the United States, with the army, came, and as soon as the treaty was ratified, the Filipinos rised up because they were furious. How we thought you were our friends, and now you're turning us. You're going to be no different than the Spanish. Yes, the U.S. were better colonial masters than the Spanish, but they're still colonial masters. And so, what began as the Filipino insurrection that would technically end in 1902, even though some insurgents were mostly Muslims, they continued to fight. They were always kind of mistreated in the Philippines until some say 1911. Some say they still go on. There's still their insurgents there today. But those are Filipino dead after that first attack when they were cut down by U.S. Now the U.S. had machine guns and just mowed them down and buried them in a mass grave. And quickly the fight turned into a really nasty guerrilla war. Yeah.
Why is it that the Philippines still?
Good question. Fun with the English language. One of the many quirks of the English language, Philippines, PH, Filipino, F. Isn't that weird? You know, Teddy Roosevelt, when he was president, he actually suggested making a new dictionary to phonetically spell all the words to get rid of all the silent letters and everything. Of course, that went nowhere because people are used to it. You know, just like we're used to the keyboards we have, even though it makes no sense now, because we're not mechanical keyboards. We're stuck with the
S or C silent.
yes. And so with that, so McKinley justified this. Here's McKinley saving the Philippines. He justified it by two things: bringing civilization, and he said that in a dream, or not, he went to his hands and knees during a dream, and God told him to bring Christianity to the Filipinos, to the heathens. Now, immediately, you should realize there's a big flaw in that. The Philippines have been a Spanish colony for 300 years, over 300 years. And what did the Spanish, what did they bring with them?
Christianity.
Almost 90% of the population were Catholic. So naturally, we want to bring Christianity to the Christians. Now, McKinley might not have known. But that's also assuming, what about most Americans? They saw that and thought, because what most Americans, what do they know about the Philippines? They're savages, you know, so they must be heathens. They don't know. Is that familiar to you? Will this happen again?
No.
Attack someplace and not have any idea what's going on there? No. Play on what people don't know? Yes, that means we should know. Write that down. We should know. So, Emilio Aguinaldo, who is in many ways like the founding father of the Philippines, he led this insurrection, even though he hated it. Insurrections are bloody, horrible things. No prisoners are taken. The Filipinos adopted guerrilla tactics using the jungle and the mountains of the Philippines, and bloody fight. And look how many American troops would eventually be sent there. More than were sent in the Spanish-American War. Now, there was a carnival game, and it's almost like whack-a-mole, but it was a carnival game, and they would put a blanket on a sheet, have a hole in it, and somebody would stick their face in the hole, and you would pay money to like time it right, hit their face when they stuck it in the hole. And you hit it with either usually like tomatoes or manure. It was almost always, you know, this is the turn of the last century, so it was almost always a black man who'd be the one. So to have that element in there. But this, it's actually a pretty clever cartoon. So here's Uncle Sam using American troops to try to hit the guerrilla Aguinaldo, who keeps ducking. And look at all the dead American troops he was trying to get him. It says here, a game that loses much to win little. And cheering him on, McKinley and Hanna. So clearly they don't like McKinley and Hanna. Well, that's actually the only thing in terms of dress. For toddlers' clothes, because it was more expensive back then to make clothes, they kind of made them kind of unisex, and there were all these kinds of dresses. So you see a lot of boys looking like that, just because you think about the expense.
Yeah.
Look at those ears.
So who was Emilio?
Emilio Aguinaldo was the leader of the Filipino insurrection. He didn't like the fight. Got to be clear about this. He did not. He wished it could end. And so you do have this issue where he's trying to figure out a way to get out of this. Yeah.
Was he really that young?
That's a picture taken up right before the Battle of Manila Bay. So yeah, he was a very young man, early 20s. And two more cartoons I just put up there to give you another look at what they look. The Philippines, and here's Uncle Sam was like a mother and unruly child. I was like, how they draw. And I put this in here because this is from the same year. And that's, anybody want to guess what that is? It's on a boardwalk in pre-Disney World, Atlantic City. And similar, right, same face, right? And the game was, you go in there and somebody would be sitting on a board across like a barrel. You've seen one of those, and you throw it, you hit it, they drop them into the water. And look what they call it. Remember what I said? This was the most racist time in American history. actually all over the world. No coincidence. In the United States, partially for imperialism, in Europe for imperialism, but also to control now free slaves. And this war is going to be a bloody war. And this shows some of the insurrectionists, but mostly not rifles. What kind of weapons do they have? Machetes or farm implements. So a lot of times, when they attack, they just be chopped up bodies. And you can imagine how American soldiers thrown into this jungle, not knowing what's going on. Here, there's execution of just suspected insurgents. Just line them up and shot them. They weren't blue, but they started going to khaki for obvious reasons. But just imagine what's going to happen. The guerrillas go off, you can't find them, everybody looks the same. In fact, to American soldiers there who don't speak the language, who's the enemy? You have to be suspicious of everybody, right? And just imagine if you're in a unit and one of your friends is hacked up with a machete, caught in an ambush. What's the first thing you're going to want? And who are you going to get? First ones you see. And you have this attack, ambush. They go out in the jungle to try to find them. Remember the British went through many of the same things during the Southern campaign back in 1780? And this is why I got the ambush. You're going to have reprisal repeat. Just go back and keep doing it. And so here is an attack by insurgents. Here is a Minnesota National Guard unit burning down a village as a reprisal for an enemy attack. And this would go on time after time. In fact, for a reprisal for one attack, and let me jump ahead to this. In island of Samar, an American company was nearly destroyed. And it's right here at Penang. General Jacob Smith ordered his men to go into this village of Penang and kill everybody you find over the age of 10. And they lined up all these civilians and shot them. This is kind of sensationalized, but that's a ditch filled with bodies. Massacred by American soldiers. Now, it's not saying there's nothing inherently good or bad about either side. Who else was doing the same exact thing? The Germans in Southwest Africa, the British in Rhodesia, the French in Chad and the Congo. You get my point here? Imperialism. There's two Congos. No, the northern part the French took, and the southern part, and that was owned by King Leopold. He was owned by the King of Belgium, and then eventually Belgium. So you're right, but there were actually, if you look at the map now, there's two Congos.
Yeah.
The one was a French colony. And one more thing, how do you get intelligence? Now they became desperate. We got to find these guerrillas. And so I thought this was a pretty good picture showing the terror on both sides. Look at this, is pretty scary. Interrogating, holding her baby. Look at the fear. And I guarantee you, they're probably almost just as scared. You can't trust anybody. And probably trying to yell at English to someone speaking Spanish or Filipino. And that is where we get the Americans started resorting to the water cure. It's also called the water torture. You simulate drowning. There is Americans doing that to a Filipino. This is a drawing up from Life magazine, and it simulates drowning. And it's a horrific torture. Sometimes they do actually drown a lot. Mostly heart attack. I guess it's unbelievable. A number of Japanese officers would be executed for war crimes after World War II for using the water torture against Allied POWs, like American, British, Australian, Canadian, Indian soldiers. And so we started using this torture here. They just give you an idea how these kind of wars devolve. Alvarado was furious about this. I should add, almost every country in the world has signed a treaty. The U.S. ratified it against torture, including this. So that is now illegal under international and a treaty's law, so under American law. In the 1980s, Israel, though, was under a almost constant terrorist attack, and they wanted to find information, and so they decided to bring it back. But they changed the name because torture is illegal. That's where you get waterboarding.
Where you get
Waterboarding. Waterboarding is this. And when you mentioned Guantanamo Bay, in a desperation to get a connection between Iraq and 9/11, they started waterboarding people.
So it's not treaty? The treaty says no water cure?
The treaty says no water. The treaty says no torture, and this qualifies as torture. But we claim since it has a different name, it's interrogation.
Waterboarding?
Extreme
What
interrogation.
the heck? That makes no sense.
I read a little bit.
A couple more things about it. We got to get finished up. The censorship of news, though. The United States also censored information. They did not allow information to get back, and that's one thing with empire. Rights do get infringed because you got to control the empire. And so Americans really did not know what was going on in the Philippines. But because of the hell of this war, Aguinaldo did want out of this. And so he was captured. And so there would be peace. The new governor general was very capable, William Howard Taft. Roosevelt picked him. And after Aguinaldo was captured, the U.S. was like, we've had enough of this. They agreed to kind of self-rule in the Philippines, and they would become independent on July 4th, 1946, which the Philippines would be a major target of the Japanese in World War II. They would take it, and the U.S. would take it back in 45, but still gave them their independence. But there's still some conflict. In the 1980s, the Filipinos kicked the United States out as a legacy of this and then allowed them back in. There are a lot of pictures of Taft, but him on a Brahma bull, or water buffalo, I'm sorry, was just too good to pass up in the Philippines. Do you agree? Yes. And I'll put this down. You don't need to know the exact numbers. I just put this down to give you an idea how many people died in this war. Significantly more Americans died in this war than the Spanish-American War. But look how many Filipinos died. And because of disruption, because of the war, cholera epidemic just spread throughout the country. Philippine insurrections can be a pretty nasty war. Last thing I want you to write for today. I know the bell rang. The election of 1900. You don't need to know the exact number, just know casualties were higher in this war. The election of 1900. And there's a big difference now. Who's McKinley's running mate? Roosevelt has become, using the fame of the Rough Riders, he became governor of New York. But Marcus Hanna hated Roosevelt because Roosevelt he wanted to reform capitalism. Got to get him out as governor. What do vice presidents do? Do you remember? Break ties in the Senate
And wait for the vice president to die.
And I know you know about Waterboarding. I had a patient hospital. Have a good day. And it doesn't work. Which is very logical, right?
It's like water that's so fine. If you put it in a dark tank, fill it up, and then breathe. It's gonna die. So this is coming out from that water that's like air. It's violet. And then rotten out. That's used. Yeah, and all you can think of is how water is feels like you're dying. Brought back to life. But it's just in a different.
And like I see both sides.
Who's the best for who? Let's say you meet German World War II. You're good. God damn it. For Russians. But for Western soldiers, not. Japanese POW camps were unbelievable. Yeah, unbelievable. Indescribable. All right, so who was able to sleep last night?
Not me. I was shook. I didn't sleep last night, Chris.
That'll be your class title, because you gotta be ready for this class. I love priorities.
Hey, you wanna learn about the progressive era?
Kind of.
Like my third favorite era.
We forgot their. Woo! I'm tired. I'm too old for this.
Nice to meet you, Tyler.
Get out, Joe.
Fucking make me
Cool.
sad.
When was the last time you heard that?
Huh?
Literally every day.
I thought you just made up the joke like that. I thought that was all you.
Daily dad joke.
Yes, you do. You don't realize that.
I could be a great dad. It's not even real life. This was 6 days, actually, I'm on my water. Or like cheating dad.
I just like them with that one.
But this one, you know,
Hey, did anybody see 8th graders today?
oh, that's
I saw them.
They're weird. The worst is freshman.
I was just like, they're laughing. I was like, you guys sound like children.
You know that?